The mystery of what exactly is it that is keeping Boris Johnson, well, in power will be something that will come out eventually. We will find out why in all in good time. Don't worry. But that question is of what is it that is keeping Johnson in? Who really knows? I've said before that Johnson has this electoral magic, which the Tories are desperate to keep because they know they're very much out of ideas. And when it comes to a next general election time, they really don't have any, well, good ideas to sell to the people. The economy is not exactly in a good shape under their stewardship, which is the thing they are meant to be really good at. They are meant to be the party of, again, law and order. But when it looks like that, your main man in charge and probably several of the cabinet members have been fined for breaking the rules, doesn't really give you that good image. Not only that, but many MPs' refusal to deal or try and hold him to any account will also damage their potential chances at a re-election as well. There's so much you can go into about the current, Tory party at the next general election, which damage their chances so much. And the idea of keeping him when this magic can just fade away, well, we don't know. But there's also, of course, rumors flying around that Johnson has a deal with the Brexiteers that he will get rid of the Northern Ireland Protocol and usher in their, quote, wildest fantasies and dreams. This may be why we see so many of the hardcore Brexiteers like Jacob Rees-Mogg defending Boris so vehemently, even after his absolutely awful Julia Hart-Brewer interview, where she's normally sticking up for the Conservatives. But of course, we will probably know in good time what exactly it is, but who can really say what it is that is keeping Johnson in? But we are going to go over an article which, again, covers this subject because I think it's got some interesting points of view that I think are worth bringing up. So, as always, before we do go jumping into that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel that way. So, on with the article. So, this comes with The Guardian with the title of Just What Exactly is Continuing to Keep Boris Johnson in Power? A question we are all definitely asking at this moment, and we will probably find out how much that maybe keeps it in tomorrow, because again, Johnson is set to give his grandiose speech about how it's not time and all this stuff about why he should be, kept in power at the moment. But we'll get to that tomorrow when it all happens. Boris Johnson, beware. Ever since Britain first became a democracy in 1928, its prime ministers have been booted or winkled out of Downing Street rather than departed purely of their own free will. The only clear exception to this rule is Stanley Baldwin, who in 1937 announced his retirement, having won a massive majority just 2 years earlier, and then ridding the country of his scandal-ridden pro-German monarch. Of course, every one of Baldwin's successors, apart from Harold Wilson, who might have been able to hang on longer had he not quite quit before illness and exhaustion overwhelmed him, has resigned long after losing a general election. Churchill, Attlee, Home, Wilson, Health, Carnegie, Major, and of course Brown. Or, of course, losing the confidence or at least testing the patience of their parliamentary colleagues. Again, Churchill, Eden, Thatcher, Blair, Cameron, and May. Given then that ejection from from within rather from without is by no means uncommon, Johnson surely has cause for concern. Again, we can hope, or at least hope, that those letters come in. We have seen a lot of people, some have withdrawn, but some may change their minds. And we know that last time Partygate Part 1 rolled around, we knew we were 2 letters off. But of course, once that happens, you've then got the question, can they do the vote of no confidence to really get Johnson out? Because that's the next stage. It's not just sending the letters, it's that next stage. And that is also what a lot of these people sending their letters, or at least maybe holding off on them, maybe trying to count in their head at the moment. Of course, never, of course, as stunning as many imagine, his standing with the public is not only lower than it ever has been, it is lower than even enjoyed by many. Indeed, quite possibly all of his predecessors. The PM is not widely trusted, he is not considered competent, he's not even well liked anymore. And we would find pretty much the same where we subsequently survey Tory MPs at Westminster. They will be compulsively reading polls that, again, as the cost of living crisis really begins to bite, show Labour moving into the very substantial lead, not just on voting intention, but on some of the key issues that help decide elections. The website Conservative Home's very much invaluable temperature taking of the party's grassroots suggests that they are considerably less well impressed than with Johnson than they used to be, and of course considerably more impressed with many of his colleagues. And I've said before, the Conservative Home website does polls all the time. What do you think of Boris? What do you think to the rest of these cabinet? What do you think to other these? What do you think to them? And Johnson has not been at the head of, or at least in the top 5 or even the top 10 for quite some time. So the Conservative grassroots have really turned against him. And as we saw just yesterday, many senior Conservatives are having conversations with people who are their core audience who are saying, get rid of him, or else we're not going to vote for anyone else. We're just not going to vote. And that is a very daunting prospect for many of those Conservative MPs. Again, since so many of the underlying factors associated with the party getting shot of a prime minister would seem to be in play, one might be forgiven for assuming that Johnson, being issued with a fixed penalty notice over Partygate, would have lit the blue torch paper. And yet, nothing to see here. At least at last count, around 80 Tory MPs had voiced support for the PM, appearing seemingly nothing wrong with him breaking the laws he himself had made and misleading Parliament about doing so. So far, only three MPs have actually called on him in terms to go since the news of him and the Chancellor being received the fines of having broke last Tuesday. While the only member of the government, again, to quit in protest sits in the Lords, not in the Commons. So again, there is a lot of inaction, and I think it goes to see the unsurety of many of those Conservative MPs who would love the chance to get rid of Johnson are looking around at each other and thinking, we could get the letters in, but could we get the votes? Because people forget it's not just those getting those letters into the 1922 committee, it's the vote afterwards. If Johnson wins that vote, he is safe for another year. And many of these MPs are terrified. What if another scandal breaks that could be even worse than Partygate? How can we get rid of him then? It's, trust me, I think with tomorrow we could see a lot of action. We might not see a lot of anything, but Tuesday is going to be interesting to say the least. And again, calling on him in terms to go since the news of him and the Chancellor broke. Again, while the only member of again sits the Commons, sorry, lost my place there. True, that leaves at least well over 250 Tory MPs who have chosen to keep stum, including many, whether as junior ministers or low-level bag carriers, will make up the payroll vote, whose members are then obliged to go toe-to-toe and toe the party line. But anyone hoping that their silence is ominous, is opposed to the very simply spineless, is likely to be disappointed. The reasons for this, according to the majority of, again, Westminster watchers, are the mainly circumstantial. But is this the whole story? We're informed, for instance, that even the most jaded of Johnson's colleagues are having second thoughts about seeing him strutting on the world stage once more, with Ukraine providing the party and in the media, and even the columns of the editors of the Tory supporting press, with the "don't they know there's the war on" logic for keeping it in place. Yet, as others have pointed out, with reference to 2 world wars and even 1 Gulf War, that this spurious logic hasn't stayed many MPs' hands before now. We're also told about Rishi Sunak's recent fall from grace, combined with the very lingering doubts about his keenest rival, Liz Truss, making a leadership contest less likely, since the argument runs there is no consensus as to who would take over. To which the obvious rejoinder is, when has such a consensus ever been required previously? If you're stuck in a burning building with only one fire exit, you don't wait to find out what's on the other side before pushing open the door. Again, exactly. If Johnson does lose that vote of no confidence and it does go to a leadership contest, the field is open. Liz and Sunak have both had their own scandals in recent time, which have damaged their own chances. Now, again, it mentions earlier that Conservative Home post. Liz Truss is once again at the top. She is the most popular of those grassroots members. So there is this dangerous fear that if it comes down to the last 2, that Liz Truss will just walk it like a country mile. But there are, again, many people in the party who do not want Liz Truss to be members. As we've said before, we've got to keep an eye on people like Penny Mordaunt, someone who is the, quote, the traditional sort of a Tory centrist, who a lot of people seem to be coalescing around at the moment. We've got to keep an eye on her to see what she does in the next coming days. That will be interesting, to say the least. And of course, then there's the argument that, especially now that we're fretting about our own household finances, that Partygate is old news. It's even suggested that we're all spent so long discussing whether or not the police would eventually find Johnson, his breaking the law is effectively priced in, just as so many of his other fibs, flaws, and foibles have been over the years. The problem with this argument is that for every survey cited to claim that the public wants to, quote, move on, no one can find that show, or even at least show that they're still very angry about the whole thing by a very substantial majority and want the PM gone. And of course, now there's Rwanda. Again, the dead cat that was very much put out over this. Apparently, only an out-and-out radical right-wing populist like Johnson would even contemplate something so bold. And there's more to it. So if the liberal left falls headlong into such an obvious war on woke elephant trap, but is that the case? Take it from someone who spent far too long studying the issue. Tory governments have always stooped to conquer on immigration. That's what they do. We need then to look very beyond the pure controversial at the very dangerous reasons, and some rational, others left so, behind the Conservative MPs hanging on to Johnson in spite of what polling and their consciousness, and maybe some of what the braver souls on their own side may be telling them otherwise. We could, for starters, look to, quote, the rational choice argument, which approaches to politics. For one example, one of those braver souls, the Tory peer Daniel Franklin, thinks that Johnson should go, but doubts he will, citing what he calls a, quote, market failure in political coups, to go into the fact that although the majority of the party's MPs might benefit from such a moves, the costs, should it fail, are then contrived on what the minority of courageous enough to actually mount it. And that's the true point. This is what we were talking about earlier. They are weighing up the political calculus of they can get the letters, but can they win the vote? That's the big thing at the moment. The other, of course, explanation rooted in the rational choice would focus on whether the fact that Johnson, since he has a few, if any, fixed opinions, is now selectively weakened. It is relatively easy to push and pull him in whatever direction most suits his colleagues and indeed the media. Planning reform might actually see enough houses built where they're most needed. No thanks. Additional measures to combat COVID? I don't think so. Net zero? Not so fast. Spending enough to really sort out the social care or even the NHS backlog or the chronic shortfall in local authority finances or even the grave blow that by the pandemic to even children's education. Forget about it. Any new leader, by contrast, would be dinged by giving such a fresh mandate and be far less easy to actually manipulate. There is, of course, the cognitive bias beloved by behavioral economists, in particular the sunken cost fallacy, which sees us carry on investing in projects and people into which we have already poured so many resources, even when the possibility of payback grows increasingly remote, and the tendency is very exacerbated by the worry that giving up the whole thing is just a bad job, especially if we've previously publicly defended our initial choice, would be tantamount to admitting that we've been a bit of an idiot. And I think that is why. I think there are so many MPs that are so invested in Johnson, they just daren't get rid of him. I think that is a very, very valid point that I haven't thought about before, but it makes so much sense. A lot of the Brexiteers have so much stock invested in Johnson, they daren't get rid of him. And there are so many other parts and pieces of the party, for example, the new intake of the 2019 Tories, they are so desperate to distance themselves and we're not like the rest of the Tories. We're not, the rest of the Tory parties. We're Northern Tories. We're on your side, people of the North. But Johnson makes them look so bad because they have defended him while at the same time not tacitly endorsing him either, making sure that they're keeping very hands off, because I'd have thought, again, to at least secure their potential next general election win up in the north, and at least to keep them being from being, shall we say, one-term MPs, that they would be the quickest to call for Johnson to be pushed. But they aren't. They're keeping a very hands-off but hands-on approach. They're like, oh, we're touching him, no, we're not. We're touching him, no, we're not approach, which is hilarious to see, to say the least. And of course, though, the explanation is even more psychological. Graded to, of course, Johnson for helping the Tories win a big majority back in 2019 is one thing. But gratitude is normally one of the most perishable quantities in a party politics. What have you done for me lately? Again, what we've just talked about. It is normally the question to which leaders need to provide the most persuasive answer. And in any case, does not gratitude really entitle the MP to exploit and abuse his supporters' trust time and time again? There is arguably then more of a whiff of codependency in a way that Johnson's ministerial colleagues and publicly defending him aren't prioritizing his interests over their own dignity and consciousness, effectively even enabling him to continue to behave in a manner that from the outside anyway would seem to be so harmful to them. What's more, keeping him there whenever your politics is surely tarnishing the idea that accountability needs to exist not only at elections but between them too. Ultimately, however, it seems to me that the ability to utterly compromise an utterly compromised prime minister to even retain the confidence of his colleagues in spite of losing the support of not only the public and becoming a dead weight and drag on his own party's popularity must involve a degree of magical thinking. And again, we said before, the Tories are indeed very, very, very prone to some serious magical thinking. Indeed, I would argue that, like Churchill and Thatcher before him, Johnson has become what might be called a talismanic leader, one who is possessed by powers that sometimes seem superhuman, even supernatural. And trust me, like I say, there is a reason why Johnson is called Teflon Johnson. It's a nickname he has earned over many, many years, as we've said before. Johnson has survived scandals that would have wiped out other far, far more competent politicians than him. And of course, to his friends and foes alike, whatever the current evidence to the contrary, supposedly they see their party through the very worst of times and into the sunlit uplands. A word of warning, however, as Churchill and Thatcher themselves learned the very hard way, magic wears off. It is an illusion that the Prime Minister himself may appreciate. The talismanic amulets worn in Roman times to occasionally bore the Latin inscription of Uta Flex, good luck to the user. As we move towards the local elections and, of course, a by-election in Wakefield, both of which could spell serious trouble for the Tories, Johnson and his parliamentary and his media fan club are probably going to need it. So this becomes very, very interesting. We're going to have to see how tomorrow plays out. I think Johnson's fate entirely rests on that speech. Make no mistake, Johnson has probably been spending the entire weekend writing and rewriting this speech. But I think the ideas that the article puts forward are very well. I agree with them. I agree with the fact that a lot of Tories think, well, Johnson won us this massive majority. Shouldn't we keep him again to make sure that we win this massive majority again? Others, again, the sunken cost fallacy. So many Tories have poured so much effort and their own political clout into backing up Boris Johnson that they just cannot even countenance the idea of pulling out of it. So much is going on behind the scenes, probably this weekend, with Tory MPs probably chatting about each other through WhatsApp or various other means, going, what are we going to do? But tomorrow, we will know. And even then, we may still see the Tories keep Johnson. But that's the crazy idea that these Tories are in. It's magical thinking, sunken cost fallacy, and a belief that there is no one else that can lead the party. If you want a better example, when we said about the car crash interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg and Julia Hart-Brewer, Jacob Rees-Mogg said quite frankly to her, there is no one else who can do such a good job as Boris. Basically saying the rest of the Tory party are nowhere near as good as Boris. And think about that for a second. If there's no one near in the party as good as Boris Johnson, then the Tory party is in far, far deeper trouble than anyone could have ever predicted. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.